Hello and welcome to another UK column interview, and perhaps maybe we will call this interview, you remember the rhyme Old MacDonald had a farm? Well, perhaps Old MacDonald is losing a farm. And for those of you that don't know me, I am a retired state registered nurse, and I was also a government advisor at the Department of Health for 5 years. And I'm hoping, as I'm talking to you now, we're ending 2024, and my goodness, what a year it has been. And I'm hoping that you've all had a happy Christmas and that you were able to spend some time with your loved ones and enjoy some lovely food, because that's a lot about what Christmas is about: getting together, sharing love, being thankful for what we have on our plates, being thankful for the food that we're eating. But of course, the food is farmed. And whether you eat meat, whether you eat vegetables, it's all farmed. So no matter what your preference is, this, I hope, is going to be of interest to farmers in particular, to those farmers that are looking towards the future of British farming. What are farms to be replaced with? Are they going? And why are they going? Solar farms, wind farms. Where are the flower farms, the market gardens, the market farmers, the dairy farms, the chicken farms? There's far more at play now, and this interview, I hope, is going to help farmers who might not know more of what is going on in the background. And today I'm absolutely delighted. It's a double whammy today, and really I'm just here to facilitate today's interview, because this is going to be a conversation because of a chance encounter between two of our very well-known guests, Roger Meacock, who is a veterinary surgeon, Natural Healing Solutions, who we've done many interviews with, and also the wonderful Sandi Adams, who I know you're all going to be really pleased to see, who has done so much work campaigning and researching and talking about the United Nations Agenda 2030. But for those of you who are fresh to UK Column, to those of you who are farmers, who know farmers, I'd like to let Roger and Sandi both introduce themselves to you, because you might not have met them before. But thank you both, because of a chance encounter in North Devon, they had a chat and they came up with a revelation. And that is what today's interview is all about. So welcome, firstly, Roger Meacock, our veterinary surgeon. Thank you for joining us. Roger, do you mind just giving us a very brief introduction into how we got to today?
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. I'm a veterinary surgeon, as Debbie has said. I've been specialising in natural healing solutions for the last 25 plus years, and I've been awake as to what the different agendas going on for some time. And I started off in my veterinary career as a farm vet, so hence my interest and love of farming. And I also love my food. Those of you who've seen previous interviews will know that I'm actually on the carnivore diet myself. So the answer potentially losing is upsetting to me, both from a professional point of view and also from a personal point of view. And I had the pleasure to share a stage with Sandi at Clovelly in North Devon. We both were asked to speak at the same event, and we bumped into each other there and then had a chat afterwards. And this is the culmination of that brainstorming that we had at that point.
And I'm very, very pleased that you met together in Clovelly in North Devon, because that brought you together. And Sandi, welcome yet again to UK Column. But for those of you that haven't met Sandi before, Sandi, please introduce yourself.
I'm Sandi Adams. I used to work in the corporate world a long time ago, about 17, 18 years ago. And I realised that there was something not quite right. And I gave it up. And I started doing a deep dive really into what is going on in our world. I was working for companies like Microsoft and Google and GlaxoSmithKline. And so I decided to really have a look about what's going on in the world. And I drew it all right back to the United Nations, really. It seems to be the crux of it, and beyond. I mean, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and onwards. So I did this big deep dive and found where the control is coming from, and how, and then to my horror, I realized, the whole Earth Summit and the climate change lie, and how it's all being used as a vector for control. And that's really what my work is all about how really our world has been captured by these massive organizations who deem themselves to be the rightful rulers of our planet. So that's it, really.
Thank you, Sandi. And of course, just recently we've all seen it in the news, the farmers' protests. It's not long been the budget. And there was this huge uproar, of course, from farmers because of the inheritance tax. Because, I was shocked at the price of farming equipment, for example, a combine harvester, $750,000. It's extraordinary, the prices. So this is a darker agenda, though, isn't it? And I think when you met in Clovelly, and I'm going to throw it open now to both of you, because I know you've got a presentation and I know that you've got some serious concerns that you want farmers to be aware of. It's not just about one agenda. This is a far bigger issue that affects the veterinary service, that affects the business side of farming, that affects the food chain, and it affects the future. So who's going to start off? Shall we start off with Roger? You went to North Devon, you bumped into Sandi. Take us from there, and I'm going to let you two take us on into what you've discussed and what you've found in your revelation.
Yes, as you say, it's a bigger agenda, and obviously everybody talks about farming, and we think of the farming side itself, in the fields or with the cows or the chickens or the barns, but there is a far bigger industry that surrounds, or industries, I should say in the plural, that surround farming. There are all those that provide equipment for farming. There's those who service the farmers, whether they be vets, whether they be the feed merchants. The farming isn't just what goes on a farm. And if farming is being attacked, then all these other industries are being attacked as well. And I include within that, that niche of farm veterinary work, where I started my veterinary career. So this is something that we all need to be aware of. And, this is why Sandi and I had this conversation and said, really, we need to get this message out to farmers particularly. And we know how busy they are and how little time they've had perhaps to dive down the rabbit holes that we've had a look down. And so we decided that it would be a good idea to put together a presentation. And say the vast majority of the slides are Sandi's. I've added a few in, but Sandi has, one of the reasons we got together and we sort of gelled, if you like, at the meeting was Sandi was saying stuff that I knew already, and I think in my talk I was saying stuff that Sandi knew already as well. So it was good to get that reinforcement that we've maybe gone down these rabbit holes separately, that we've actually come to the same conclusions and we can see what's going on. And actually, the conclusions aren't difficult to come to, because actually it's written in the documentation, and that's why we've decided to do this presentation to talk everybody through it and step everybody through it and show what's going on. So let's get going.
Exactly what you said. One realizes that a big part of this agenda is to take over the food production and make it a big corporate entity, and to get rid of traditional farming and traditional farmers, and particularly smaller farms, medium-sized farms, and to make it impossible for farmers to pass their farms down to their family, to make it a family business that gets passed down through generations, which historically it's always been that way. And what they intend to do is to take that facility away from the farmers and literally turn them into corporate entities. And it's going to initially, really impact on our food supplies. I think, they're just trying to cover our land with these renewable energy facilities like solar farms, wind farms, housing's a big one. And you look at the land use mapping, in local, authority land use mapping, you'll find that there's very little provision for food security, and that is the biggest problem at the moment that we're facing, is food security in 2025 and onwards. We are going to really, really be challenged. And that's why we're here.
That's really helpful. Thank you both so much for that. And I'd probably just add that, the sustainable goals, and you've just mentioned food security there, Sandi, and I'm seeing that far from sustainable, we're being made deliberately very unsustainable.
The plot to seize your farm. So the idea is, this isn't a new idea. It's a technocratic plan that originated nearly 100 years ago. So the following presentation is a conspiracy, but it's not been constructed by us. It was initiated decades ago with the ultimate aim to maintain control of the growing masses by the few. The slides show the proof taken from government documents and those of undemocratically established global organizations that were set up to achieve their goal for a new world order who will dictate global governance in a partnership with non-governmental organizations, which is Mussolini's definition of fascism. Prominent politicians, financiers, and industrialists have been groomed to implement the plan in every country, regardless of which party has been elected within the uniparty system. It gives the bogus impression of democracy when none exists in reality. How it all began.
It's been a very long-term plan, this whole agenda of a carbon-based economy. And it started in the 1930s with the just after the Depression in America. And it was led by political scientists and engineers, a guy called M.K. Hubbard and Howard Scott from Columbia University. They proposed a replacement of capitalism with an energy-based economy as opposed to a price-based economy. It was reintroduced by the Trilateral Commission, Zbigniew Brzezinski, in 1973 as the new economic order known as sustainable development and the green economy. Many alumni of Columbia head up the present agenda, like Klaus Schwab, Amitai Etzioni, he's the communitarian guy, George Soros, David Rockefeller. They were an elite group of technocrats trying to implement what was then global warming to create a new carbon-based economy. So they already, the seeds of it were actually back in the 1930s. Their whole agenda didn't actually come to anything. It kind of fell at the beginning of at the end of the Second World War, because people weren't ready quite to give up capitalism. But what's interesting is Joshua Haldeman is Elon Musk's great-grandfather, and he was heavily involved in this whole technocratic movement, and they called it Technocracy Inc. It was a big push to really get onto this carbon-based economy. And he was Elon Musk's great-grandfather. He was a maverick, an entrepreneur. He flew his family all over the world in his plane, and Elon's father led a very unconventional life in the 1930s. Right the way up to 1947, Haldeman headed up Operation Columbia, named after the university. He supported Howard Scott and Alexander King in the technocracy movement. Alexander King, by the way, was also a member of the Club of Rome. He had already set up his social credit party, so that tells you a lot about him. He organized Operation Columbia, funded by the Freemasons of the United States, with a convoy of cars to drive from California to Vancouver, stopping at every Masonic temple along the way to preach the new economic order of an energy-based economy. It failed, because, as I said, people weren't ready to give up capitalism. This is just a picture of this very strange grey convoy that went literally from California to Vancouver. And they used to dress in long grey overcoats and do Nazi salutes to each other. It was all a bit strange, the technocracy movement. Anyway, it had to be given up. And I'm just going to quote Fritz Springmeier, who's done a deep dive into Freemasonry. The Kabbalah is a foundational doctrine underlying Freemasonry, and a lot of these occult organizations, people don't understand that the Kabbalism, they believe that they are going to be there's going to be two saviors of this world, and one of those saviors is going to be technocracy, and we wonder who the other one's going to be. Anyway, one of them is going to be technocracy, the savior of the world, and that's a bit worrying, really. Now, I just want to make it clear who's behind the United Nations, because it is interesting that the Rockefeller brothers were responsible for the building of the UN headquarters in New York in 1946. Nelson and David Rockefeller bought the site at East River with an $8.5 million donation from their father, J.D. Rockefeller. The Rockefeller Brothers Foundation also donated $2 million to the original League of Nations to buy the land in Geneva, which is where the UN building now stands in Geneva, and the WHO. That happened in 1927, where the UN now stands. The Rockefeller brothers founded the UN. I just want to make that clear, because not many people realize that actually it was all built on the foundation of the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. So that is, that's quite something. I don't think many people understand that. Now, I'm going to mention this because this is all very important when you realize the corporatocracy that we're now facing and how it's emerged, and why the public-private partnerships that are now being created is all part of this. This is a secret in US intelligence report that proves that the Nazis planned a Fourth Reich by creating a European economic order, by bankrolling industrialists to take control of nation states in Europe. In 1944, top SS officers in the Nazi Party distanced themselves from Hitler. The war couldn't be won militarily, so they planned to take over the world in a different way. At a meeting in the Maison Rouge, Strasbourg, they invited all the top industrialists in Germany at the time. This included Krups, Flick, Daimler-Benz, IBM, Siemens, Volkswagen, and IG Farben, among more. With the backing of the United States through Operation Paperclip, these top corporations were told to grow many companies and create a corporatocracy to take over Europe, using the EU as the means. Before the common market EU could be formed, the Nazi industrialists had to be pardoned. The bankers and officials were sort of pardoned in that process and were able to carry on doing business in the US. In 1957, John Maclay, the American High Commissioner for Germany, issued an amnesty for convicted war criminals. This included the above-mentioned corporations. This is why we have BlackRock and Vanguard now. This is like it all started really then when the United States bankrolled all the big industrialists from Germany. So we now see that we're living under that corporatocracy. And that kind of links in with what's happening now, the big takeover, the corporate takeover of everything literally in our world. The Club of Rome seemed to be behind a lot of this. It was formed as a sort of crisis think tank for the United Nations. It's a global think tank, and it was founded on the Malthusian principle that the Earth has limited and finite resources. It was founded in 1968 at the Rockefellers' private estate in Bellagio, Italy, by Aurelio Pecce, an Italian industrialist, for the Rockefeller Foundation and the UN. The main purpose for the Club of Rome is to formulate a crisis through which the world could be united under a one world government. Global problems require global solutions. So they just sort of chuck around ideas about, and it's usually on this kind of problem, reaction, solution model. Various Club of Rome reports paved the way for Agenda 21, the intended agenda for the 21st century. This was called the Global Report for the President in the year 2000. They wanted to figure out a way of reducing the population. And I've got a copy of this somewhere. Yeah, here it is. There we are. And it's quite, and it was really given to Jimmy Carter. And it was really a way of saying, right, we're going to reduce the population it said the US population figure of 100 million emerged again on the CIA-linked website called Deagle. That Deagle's a different thing, and we'll get onto that later. But the Global 2000 report was really going into depopulation and how it could be reduced using population control, like this decreasing population, but also manipulating population by using other means. And they used the Vietnam War as an example in this book of how they could actually reduce the population. So it's pretty heavy stuff. This is quite interesting. This is the Deagle report that was published about 10 years ago, a decade ago. It suddenly appeared on the Deagle website. It's a true intelligence operation for the United States government run by the CIA in 2014 to 2018. It came down in, just before the pandemic, actually. Their website predicted a massive 50 to 80% global depopulation by 2025. The CIA and the World Bank contributed to these forecasts. These predictions have been taken down in late 2021 with no explanation. The UK population forecast was to go from roughly 65 million in 2019 to 15 million in 2025, later revised down to 15 million in 2021. These forecasts were for 179 countries with varying degrees of reductions and increases. Now, these Deagle forecasts, no one knows how they came up with these figures for the population forecast of 2025. It would seem that America, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK were significantly hit by these lowered population forecasts, and we don't know how they came up with these at all, but it's just worrying. It's concerning that these forecasts, and the fact that they took them down in around 2021, and with no explanation at all as to why they were up there for a good 4 or 5 years. No more than that. But anyway, that's where they were. Now, one of the other major Club of Rome reports was limits to growth. Now, these Club of Rome reports came just before the Earth Summit, and they made the bones up of Agenda 21. And Limits to Growth was published in the 1970s, I think it was 1971. And it was really, again, it was about population and how population needs to be controlled. It's a bit like the Global 2000 report. It was using computer models, flawed computer models, about how there wouldn't be enough resources to go around. And by 1980, there wouldn't be enough food, there wouldn't be enough anything to go around. So it was basically saying that we need to do something. We need to use contraception. We need to use ways of decreasing the population. And it was really a bit Malthusian, this whole thing, but deeply flawed, because it was at a time in the 1970s where there was a great debate going on about population, and a guy called Paul Ehrlich had written The Population Bomb, a book, and that bomb didn't ever go off. Again, it was based on flawed computer models. It was a very fashionable thing to be talking about in the 1970s, that there were too many of us. And it's interesting now, we're not even at replacement level in Europe. So there's certainly in Europe, there's no population problem at all. And we'll go on to the other Club of Rome's after this next slide, which I think Roger could talk about.
Yeah, this is Dr. Dennis Meadows, who actually was one of the main authors of the Limits to Growth report that Sandi's just been talking about. And he did an interview that was recorded on video. And this is just a short excerpt from it, where he talks about how the population needs to be taken down. And at the time he was doing the interview, it was saying that, we've got 7 million and we need to get down to 1. And he did this original report, obviously, in 1972, but he revised the book in 2004. And, he certainly hadn't changed his opinions by that time. So, this little excerpt is part of a much longer interview which he did.
The planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. I mean, we could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart. That's, unfortunately, you never have smart dictatorships. They're always stupid. But if you had a smart dictatorship and a low standard of living, you can have it. But we want to have freedom, and we want to have a high census, so we're going to have 1 billion people. And we're now at 7, so we have to get back down.
Back to you, Sandi.
This is about Zbigniew Brzezinski, because he was the person who reignited the whole new economic order, the technocracy movement of the 1930s. And he wrote a book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in a Technocratic Era. He studied political science at Columbia University with M.K. Hubbard and Howard Scott. He was key in forming the new economic order, resource-based economy, CO2 carbon taxing. Resources are more valuable than money in the technocratic age. They must be controlled and owned. And that's his that was his contribution. He was very, very pushing this whole new economic order, which actually became Big Society with David Cameron and Tony Blair. Now, in 1987, now that the limits to growth and the between two ages within the 1970s, and then we go forward to 1987, where Gro Harlem Brundtland, Prime Minister of Norway at the time, and she worked very, very closely with Maurice Strong from the United Nations. He was at that time he was the Secretary General, and they both wrote this book together, but although Gro Harlem Brundtland takes all the credit for it. And it was the report on the World Commission on Environmental and Development by Gro Harlem Brundtland. And it's often known as the Brundtland Report. Now, Prince Charles still uses this and quotes it. It's almost like his Bible. And it's all about really leveling up the wealth of all the nations. Wealth needs to be distributed from wealthy countries to poorer nations, as wealthy countries are destroying the planet. That was the idea. India and China, which is interesting. It was this whole shift from wealth to be given over to poorer countries like India and China. It was a communitarian plan to bring equity, not to be confused with equality, to all countries. The West was too rich and was polluting and had to become poorer and less polluting. To meet with the third world, it came under the scrutiny during the Paris Climate Conference, when the disparity of emissions between the West and India and China had become a cause for concern. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Maurice Strong, called it a second Marshall Plan. And that's exactly what it was. It was a way of just shifting over the money. So our industry became destroyed, really, because everything went to China. Now, after Our Common Future, the next Club of Rome report to be published was just before the Earth Summit in 1991. It was this book where the quote, about humanity being the enemy of humanity, man being the enemy of humanity, because they literally were looking for a scapegoat. This whole Club of Rome report was about trying to find scapegoats, because at the end of the day, we needed enemies. The wall had come down, the Berlin Wall had come down, the world wars had finished, and there were no enemies. So they had to create one, and they created us as the enemy. So climate change was chosen as a vehicle behind which to unite the people through an existential fear, to accept restrictions to freedoms and rights with higher taxes that wouldn't otherwise be accepted. So they did identify us in this Club of Rome report as the enemy of the planet, basically. So, and that's why we are being attacked right now. Then, of course, we then had the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, sometimes called the UNCED Conference, UNCED. And it was the birth of global governance. This is where really it kicked in. This is where they got together and thought, right, this is it. We're going to really make a plan to have global governance. This is a quote from Maurice Strong at the Earth Summit. He was the Secretary General. We may get to the point where the only way of saving the world will be for industrialized civilizations to collapse. Isn't it our responsibility to bring this about? That is what he actually said. Now, that's what we're seeing now, is the Western civilization collapsing, and it's all controlled, and it was all meant to collapse. That's what we're seeing now. Now, who was Maurice Strong? Well, he was the grandfather of Agenda 21. He headed up the Earth Summit in Rio. He was an oil billionaire, and he worked for the Rockefeller brothers for 17 years. He was a member of the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, the Council for Foreign Relations, a member of the Fabian Society. He was a self-confessed communist in ideology and capitalist in methodology. So that's a true communitarian. That's how he thinks. It's the new communism and it's communitarianism. He was exiled to China to avoid prison in the US for being involved in the oil for food scandal in 1995, where the UN Security Council made a resolution to supply Iraq with food in exchange for oil. There were revelations of corruption of funds involving Maurice Strong, Adnan Khashoggi, and many other oil billionaires. He loved China and the communist system, and he was friends with Chairman Mao. His cousin actually lived with Chairman Mao. So he ended his days in China and he loved the whole Chinese communist system, social credit system, everything. So we now realize who was behind the Earth Summit where all this global governance was brought in. So this is it. This is Agenda 21. It was launched then, and it's the agenda for the 21st century. That's why it's called Agenda 21. It's also called Sustainable Development. That's where the term Sustainable Development came in. It's written as a 42-chapter document. On the face of it, it talks of sustainability, environmentalism, and conservation. But at its heart, it seeks to divide man from nature and control all resources, taking control of land, sea, minerals, and just about everything on the planet under the deception of saving the world. Prior to this summit, many of the oil billionaires and bankers had invested in the carbon credit banks. Obama had set up the Chicago Climate Exchange. So they'd already invested in this new economy that they'd been trying to get going since the 1930s. And now this was their flagship launch of this agenda. And it worked. It worked. Now, this is interesting. This is Prince Charles. Now, there's a picture there of him with Václav Havel from Czechoslovakia and Klaus Schwab is that chap in the back, looking very young there. Prince Charles was in with all that lot, and he was at the Earth Summit. In fact, before the Earth Summit, this is quite interesting. I'm going to just say this, just like the Red House report, this is a corporate takeover of the world. In 1990, Prince Charles set up the Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum as a model for public-private partnerships. It was called the Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum, became immensely powerful worldwide, bringing together over 50 powerful corporations, partners and members and funders. In 1991, a year before the Rio summit, Prince Charles hosted a meeting on Royal Yacht Britannia, where the summit was going to be held in 92. And he hosted this meeting with members of the UN, WEF, IMF, World Bank, and key executives of Shell and BP, as well as European leaders, to push the idea of sustainable development, referencing the UN Brundtland Report as the roadmap for the future world's economy. The following year, in 1992, he hosted the same oligarchs in the Rio de Janeiro harbour to celebrate the successful signing up to Agenda 21 of 178 countries. And that's what happened at the Earth Summit. They managed to get 178 leaders of countries to sign up to Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, to save the planet. And of course, who wouldn't want to save the planet? All the leaders signed up to this. It was to save the planet and revolutionize the world's economy to that of a carbon-based economy controlled by private corporations. There was a whistleblower called George Hunt, and he said, as they chinked their champagne glasses on Royal Yacht Britannia, they applauded themselves, saying, yes, we did it. We got the whole world to sign up to global governance. So unfortunately, that's what happened, and that's why we're in the state we're in now. Public-private partnerships via NGOs are undermining politics as non-governmental organisations and all Western governments. So they're undermining politics and all Western governments. They are the big business that's destroying representational government in the form of an oligarchy. These extremely powerful multinationals have the ability and are taking over the national governments globally to create global governance driven by greed. Corporate structure will undermine everything if we allow it. It's the new form of corporate communism, also referred to by Klaus Schwab of the WEF as stakeholder capitalism. So they're transitioning us from shareholder capitalism, which is a normal price-based economy, into stakeholder capitalism, which is corporate-led capitalism. So it gets rid of small and medium-sized businesses, it gets rid of small farms, and what they really want is to corporatize it and have these massive super farms and massive super corporation, sort of businesses, so that that the high street will die, that the small businesses will die, and this is what we're facing. Now, just to go back, I always talk about this because it is important. The Global Diversity Assessment of 1995, which I have a copy of here, it's a very, very big book, and it's got all the. It really is. It was published after the Earth Summit, but obviously it's over 1,000 pages. It cost $3.3 billion to produce, and it is a control and inventory of everything on our planet. So it's almost like an inventory, really, of everything, every mineral, every animal, every plant, and how they are going to manage it. How how the globalists are going to manage our planet. And there's nothing in here except on page 993 about human beings. And on page 933, they talk about the humans that have destroyed the planet. They'll be put into what they call human settlement zones. And these human settlement zones will have corridors in between. And that was all part of something called the Wildlands Project, which I'll go on to in a couple of slides' time. So it was really a way of cataloguing everything and how it needs to be managed and controlled. Bill Gates' depopulation equation based on CO2, and this is obviously Bill Gates' equation. I don't really understand it. I think obviously it's made up. It's basically CO2 equals people times services per person times energy per service times CO2 per unit. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense. Bill Gates has been buying up huge areas of farmland in the USA and met with Keir Starmer the week before the budget that announced the IHT change, that's the inheritance tax. He has invested heavily in frankenfoods, yet also in methane reduction in cows. He is a climate alarmist, causing this as leverage to ensure success of his wild ideas and investments, e.g. dimming the sun with chemtrails. He has invested in the WHO, the World Health Organization, to promote his vaccine investments, and has been implicated in a number of scandals surrounding this, including in Kenya, where tetanus and Gardasil vaccines were used to sterilize young girls. I believe some of them died. I mean, he was actually thrown out of India because his vaccinations killed so many young people. Bill Gates is heavily invested in this whole agenda of control of the planet, control of the land, taking away farmland. And it is a huge land grab, corporate land grab of monstrous proportions. Now, this came out of the Global Diversity Assessment that I just showed you. This is a map of America, and this was put forward as a project called the Wildlands Project of North America. I used to include these over 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago in my slide presentations, and people used to go, oh, that's a bit of a conspiracy theory, that'll never happen. But, it's all of the stuff that we've been talking about for so many years is happening. And I began to question myself at one point, but actually it all is rolling out. Unfortunately, I didn't want it that way. This particular slide is important because it's a simulated reserve and corridor system to protect biodiversity. Most of the map you see there is yellow and red. Well, those are the areas that humans aren't allowed to be in. And you've got the red areas are core reserves and corridors, little or no human use. And then the yellow bit are buffer zones, highly regulated use, which means it's for military and federal use. And then you've got these little green dots all over the country, And they are normal use. This is where the humans are allowed to be, in these little green dots, which are zones. They call them human settlement zones. And then the pink ones are Indian reservations. So it's almost like they're treating everyone like indigenous, they need to be put in reservations. And then you've got the grey ones, which are a few there, which are military reservations. Now, this was produced by David Foreman of Earth First. Now, we know what Earth First is all about. It's all part of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. And it was financed by Big Oil. The UN Wildland Project was very controversial at the time. 75% of the US to be given over to self-willed land and restocked with wild boar, wolves, bears, and wild vegetation. On page 993 of the US Global Diversity Assessment, I mentioned this, the Wildland Project plans to remove 50% of the United States population into urban areas or human settlement zones, consisting of high-rise dwelling units that are to be situated near railway tracks. The railroad will be the main means of transportation. Private automobiles will not be permitted. The Obama stimulus was a major source of funding for this project. EU plans to rewild 1 million hectares of land, 2.47 million acres, and farmers in the UK now paid to rewild their land. So this is where the rewilding has come in. If farmers aren't putting these renewables on their land or housing, then they're being asked to rewild their land. And where is the food? This is what we have to ask. Where is the food? And they want to starve us, basically. Now, there's a number of these World Wilderness Conferences that happen all around the world, UN-based, they call wilderness conferences. They had one in Jaipur in 2020. Actually, it had to go online in the end because of the pandemic, but they plan to rewild 50% of the earth by 2050. Co-hosted by China, unveiling a global leadership committee. So they hold these big conferences all over the world. They do it all the time, the UN. They hold these conferences and they make decisions on our behalf that we have no idea about. So, and that's just to prove that there is World Wilderness Conferences going on.
Wow. I mean, Sandi, there is one heck of a lot of information there and a lot to unpack. And I'm sure people will probably have to go back and watch it again because the history, but now we've got the background, which is really important. So you farmers out there that are watching, don't panic and think, oh, this is so much. We just want you to know what the background is, okay? So that if you do want to go and research it and you do want to go and look at these documents, these huge, great, big, thick books, and I'm sure you haven't got time knowing what a farmer's life is like to do all of this incredible research. But I just want to come back on a few things because I think in part 2, where we're going to go is where we are now. So sustainable goals and how we're going to end hunger, or are we going to end hunger? Are we going to be in the future looking forward to a famine, or is it going to be a feast of bugs? Are our animals going to be injected with things that are dangerous to them and to us? So this is all the material that we'll be covering in part 2. But I just think for the last few minutes today, and thank you so much for that amazing presentation, let's just have a quick conversation. And I'm going to throw it open to Roger in a minute to make some comments. But my comments initially are that I'm fascinated that you, of course, mentioned the Rockefellers, and perhaps farmers don't know the significance of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And believe me, while all this may sound like conspiratorial theories, it isn't. This is science fact, not science fiction. So everything you're hearing today is real. But when we go back to the Rockefellers, for people in the UK, you might be interested to know actually that the NHS wasn't really founded in 1948 by Nye Bevan. It was actually created by David Rockefeller when he was sent across from America to the London School of Economics. And he and William Beveridge cooked up the whole social welfare reform that we now see the NHS. So that's just a reference to the Rockefellers. And I think also your references to the then Prince Charles, Sandi. We've done a lot of work on UK Column, and for anybody that wants to have a little bit more in-depth look at our King Charles, we have a 5-part series which is growing all the time. There'll be a part 6 soon of a series called The Green King, where we look at the background of what our king has been doing in his long reign, 50 years on the Royal Yacht Britannia. He's been up to a lot on the Royal Yacht Britannia, an awful lot. And I just want to say to people that Sandi mentioned there the Earth Summit and this kind of new religion that we're kind of looking at that seems to be the Earth. That's the new religion, Mother Nature. And of course, the Earth Charter as well. We now have an Earth Charter. And the Earth Charter is otherwise known as Terra Carta, which belongs to King Charles. And King Charles has all the land, right? So farmers, especially for me down here in Cornwall, the Duchy, a lot of the farming land is Duchy land. And our king is very much involved, very much involved. And I think it was absolutely fascinating as well when you brought up the Trilateral Commission, because as we're speaking right now, Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, of course, is a member of the Trilateral Commission. So you can see how everything's dovetailing in. And this is going to make for a very interesting conversation in part 2. So I do hope you'll join us for part 2. But Roger, give us a message from a vet to farmers about all of this that's going on, you know, containing people into zones and corridors and land that you can't go on. I mean, what is the future for the farmer that you go and serve, the farmers' animals that you go and look after?
Yes, Debbie, yeah, very concerning. I mean, sort of one of the reasons why we decided to put this presentation together really was to give the history of it all. And, you know, if we start talking straight away about what the current situation is and what's intended, it would sound so ridiculous and outlandish that no one would take us seriously. And, you know, that's been a problem which I know we've all had individually when we've been trying to speak to people, and you've only got a few minutes and you try and give them a few facts, and they tend not to want to believe you because it sounds so dystopian. And yet we've seen it all actually in some of the movies and things from Hollywood. You know, how many of those have been based on a dystopian reality that actually, when we look back at it, is actually starting to come true. And I watched the BBC version of 1984, and it was on telly not so long ago. And I did it as my O-level English lit book. And it was just hit me as to how when I did it, you know, as a teenager for O-levels, how bizarre it sounded, how unrealistic it sounded. And then actually watching the film of it now, actually realizing how much they've missed out. You know, we've got so much more already that's already going on. And, you know, farmers and people perhaps coming across some of this material for the first time, you know, we're not expecting you to learn it and understand it and quote it back at all by any means. But what we're trying to do is just give you some proof that what we're going to go on and say in part 2 and what we're saying now in this discussion isn't based on our fanciful ideas that we've plucked out of some dystopian nightmare that we've dreamt up some night. You know, this has come from all these documents which have step by step taken through what the plan is, and it just happens that we've got to that stage in industry and development of tech that the facility for using technology for surveillance control is now come to the point of reality. And although it may not have been fully implemented here, there certainly has been in other countries. We only have to look at the Chinese social scoring system. We know that India put in a system during COVID for monitoring their citizens, and that was put in by Infosys, which is a company owned by Rishi Sunak's father-in-law's company. So, you know, these coincidences, inverted quotes, aren't happening by chance. You know, there is a definite plan in place. There are step-by-step issues here, and all these things are connected. And so, you know, we do need to wake up, because I went to the to the demonstration, the first demonstration that for the farmers about the inheritance tax, and I listened to some of the speakers there, and that was one of the things that really hit me when I was there, that a lot of the farmers were obviously very concerned about their future and what was being planned and said in the budget, etc. But I didn't really get a feeling that there was an understanding or a grasping that there was a much bigger picture, and the idea that the inheritance tax has been a miscalculation based on figures that have been, mistakenly picked up from the wrong department of government is what they want us to think. This is very much a planned approach. They have absolutely every intention to do what they're trying to do, and that's why we need to be aware of the bigger picture and to realize that it is all part of a much bigger plan. And although we're approaching this very much from the farming perspective, other small businesses which have been included within the last budget as well, any small medium enterprise business is now being attacked by these similar sorts of measures. So this is really what we're trying to get across is you don't have to learn all the details, I say, but just understand that this isn't being fabricated by us. This is documents which Sandi's obviously got copies of from all her research there, and some of these books can't be got hold of anymore because they're trying to hide and stop people from getting hold of the proof, but they had to distribute it to those they wanted to, so they had to print it originally. So this is the message we're trying to get across is this is a definitive plan which is going ahead step by step, and we need to know what it is so that we can resist it and understand where it's headed, and realize that it is much part of a big agenda. So yeah, that's my perspective on where we've got to so far.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that. And this is why part 2 is going to be incredibly important. And as we've said before, today we've brought you 2 experts with a huge amount of knowledge who have done thousands of hours work, research. All that you've heard today is evidenced. It's all real. And I just want to, before I go to both of you for your last word, as we always do, I just want to answer a question for Sandi, because you put out a question earlier when you were talking about Technocracy Inc. and my ears were pricking up. And you were talking about there were 2 saviours of the world, and Technocracy Inc. was apparently one of them. Well, I can reveal, we have revealed it before on UK Column, but the other saviour of the world is King Charles. And there is a statue of King Charles as the saviour of the world. This is real, I'm not making this up. King Charles, he was then Prince Charles, knew about this statue. It was commissioned, he was presented with it. It is now in place in the Brazilian rainforest. And some of you may be quite interested to see the picture. So in the little article that goes beneath this interview, there will be a picture of the saviour of the world. So I think there's a lot more to be said about the King's involvement, the Commonwealth's involvement, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. And maybe we'll talk about that moving forward. But in part 2, it's going to be what's happening now and what's going to be affecting your farm and your future. So please come back for part 2. But for now, I'm going to throw first to Roger, and then we're going to go straight to Sandi for your last word. And our grateful thanks for doing all the research, for putting out the message, and also for making the presentation to show people. And if you like what the UK Column are doing and you can share the material, please do, because the message really does need to get out. So thank you again, both of you. And it's over to you first, Roger, for your last word. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Obviously, what we've been presenting today, as I say, we've described it a little bit as a step towards a dystopian future. So, but I don't want anybody to have nightmares about it. We're aware of it, and I think it is all going to come crashing down. And I don't think they're going to achieve what they want to achieve, but that will happen more quickly if more of us are aware of it. So, I would urge people to share what they're learning and to do their own research too. Everything that we've managed to research can be found out there. So we're not saying anything that we've only got access to. So my view, overall message going, sort of leaving really is one of hope. Is that I do think we're already seeing it where people are starting to perhaps look to local farms and to source directly and understand what's going into the food that they're actually putting on their own table. And so my sort of message really is an encouragement to farmers who are perhaps feeling a little bit in despair over what's happened with inheritance tax and wondering whether to carry on farming. My message to you is carry on. We need your food, and we love your food, and so please carry on and find your own ways of whether you join with local farmers around you, whether you do your own farm shop, or whether you find other ways of supplying direct. Then that would be my message, would be to urge you to do that as well. And for consumers, we're all consumers, farmers as well, but it's easy for them to find their own food on their own farm. But those people who are local to farms, please do look for local farmers who are trying to make their food more available to you directly. It is better profit for them, so that they can survive and carry on farming the way they want to, not the way they're going to be dictated to. And it's better food for you because it's not being travelled, it's fresher, where it's come from, and it's all lovely and healthy because UK farmers are the best farmers in the world. So that's my message of hope, really. And those who are in industries that are sort of para-farming, for want of a better phrase, those industries around, you need to wake up too and to support your farmers, as I know you do in your businesses, but to consider, these wider implications, because if farming goes, then your businesses are under threat too. And I include the veterinary profession, certainly on the farm side, with that too. And if they go for farm animals, then they'll be going for horses. We've already heard some ridiculous stories about finding avian flu in Mongolian horses that could possibly be transmitted to people. I mean, it's all rubbish. And we need to be aware. Otherwise, if they're successful in getting rid of farms, they'll be looking to go for the rest of our animals if we're not careful.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you so much. I think that's a very poignant message. Question everything. And now, Sandi Adams, thank you so much again for the wonderful presentation and for joining us today. And it's over to you for your last word. Thank you, Sandi.
Thank you for the opportunity for this, because if we can reach as many farmers as we can, because farmers, they work hard. They haven't got time to really go into a deep dive as to what is really happening in our world and what's been happening for many, many decades. And hopefully this presentation, and please, as Roger said, don't believe us. Do your own research. I mean, I don't get paid for doing this. It's something that I feel passionate about, that I've been doing on my own part-time for the last 17 years, and horrified at the way it's been unfolding. So what we really need is numbers, and we need farmers. We've done the research for you. Do check it out. But we've done the research for you so that you can have a better understanding that it's not just about inheritance tax. It's about a whole agenda to literally de-incentivize farmers, which they've seen with the SFI. We know that that they've been told that their subsidies are going, and that they have to create these businesses on their farms that don't involve food production, particularly meat and dairy. So what we're asking farmers to do is to look at this critically and realise that actually, where is the food going to come from? Because there's no provision for it, there's no food security, and that they need to really think about that before they think about putting solar panels on their farm and selling out to the big corporations and getting the money from them, and to really think about perhaps, just understanding that, there's other ways. The British public will support them. And there's a massive awakening of people looking at what they're eating, as Roger said, looking at the stuff that's being put into our food. And people want pure food. They don't want fake meat and stuff that's put in milk to stop cows from farting, or all that horrible stuff. And it's, in a way, it's doing us a favour. The worse it gets, the more people are waking up. But we do need that mass awakening of the farmers to really understand that there is another way. There's another way of farming. And the thing is that if we don't do this, what will happen is the super farms, which we'll be talking about in the next tranche of slides and presentations, is what the future of farming entails. And it is so dystopian that nobody in their right mind would want that. So we have to find another way. And we have to do this together with the public. No one else is going to help us. The government aren't. No one's going to save us. It's us and the farmers. And I believe, as Roger said, that we can do this. We can actually have hope, that we can have a future for our rural communities and for the people in cities that are served by the rural communities. So I think we need to really sort of hunker down and understand where this is coming from, where it's going, and just say no. Don't consent to all this nonsense. Because if we do, I know they're going to try and push this avian flu thing. We will end up in the same way that we did with foot and mouth and with mad cow disease, with pyres of perfectly healthy animals, being destroyed. And we cannot go down that route anymore, because that will be the end of UK farming. So that's all I've really got to say. And thank you so much for this.